Greetings and welcome back to Room 303 in our Chats with Emily as we are calling our readings through the poetry of Emily Dickinson. We are in the Johnson edition. We now turn to poem 290 of Bronze and Blaze. Now, when this poem was published in 1896, it was actually called Aurora. It is a poem about the Northern Lights, the Borealis, but really it's a poem about publishing. And as we've said about Emily, she spent her adult life unwilling to share her materials with other people. And yet, she somehow believed that her poetry would last on to centuries, in fact, in this poem. So, in that regards, we're in a tradition already that we've seen where Emily is challenging herself to think about her poetry as having some kind of longevity to it. Now, our assumptions are that you've been following our stuff at learnstrong.net, down that left-hand side, Chats with Emily, our playlist. I'm hopeful that you've already worked through the preceding 289 poems. We just finished with 289, I Know Some Lonely Houses. Now, I want you to notice the movement in this poem as we work with it. From the grand, the Northern Lights, to the simple, and then finally back to the grand, her hope that maybe her poetry will outlast, in some ways, herself. And as well, the Northern Lights are majestic, but do the Northern Lights know they're majestic? That will be the question. Emily somehow seems to know that what she's doing as a creative product is something that will last. She'll say it this way: of bronze and blaze the north tonight, so adequate it forms, so preconcerted with itself, so distant to alarms, unconcerned, so sovereign to universe or me, infects my simple spirit with taints of majesty till I take vaster attitudes and strut upon my stem, disdaining men and oxygen for arrogance of them. My splendors are menagerie, but their competeless show will entertain the centuries when I am long ago an island in dishonored grass, whom none but beetles know. Now, I should point out, Emily struggled with the word choice of either beetles or daisies, calling herself obviously a daisy a number of times in her life. And Johnson has elected to supply us with the word beetles instead of daisy. There's some debate among scholars about which one probably works best. I mean, I have to be honest, I like both of these words. I wish that I could read the poem maybe several times out loud for us and then using different of these two words to see how it works. Let's go to work, though, specifically with the poem. Obviously, we're enjoying the Northern Lights. By the way, she will use the word bronze when we get to poem 1192. Honest tear is durabler than bronze, and that will be, we'll come back to this use of bronze, obviously, color versus strength of metal. And blaze, by the way, can you hear all the Z sounds? This is a fun poem, by the way, to read aloud. The north, and then she'll put this poem in the immediacy of right here, right now, as in tonight. Almost as if she's inviting you to take a look at the northern lights and be blown away by them, and yet ask the same question that we asked a few moments ago. Do the Northern Lights know how majestic they really are? So, now to make the connection, and we get four of these so's, right? So adequate. This, by the way, is her first use of that word in her poems in the Johnson edition. It forms, and I can't help but think of the word forms and think, of course, of our study of Plato's Republic, more particularly, of course, of Republic 6, and the whole notion of the theory of the forms. It forms so, and then she'll use these words she only uses one time in all her poetry. It's amazing to me the number of words that get used in this poem only once in all of her poetic ventures. So preconcerted with itself, so distant to alarms, on unconcerned, another only time it ever gets used, unconcerned, so sovereign. In other words, the Northern Lights are majestic, but they somehow stand apart from knowing that they're majestic. They have no capacity to recognize just how stunningly beautiful they are to the universe, or me. And for the first time, obviously, she kind of brings herself into this poem, and then she'll say it. All of this, the Northern Lights, infects my simple spirit. By the way, in fact, only gets used one time in all of our poetry. It's here. And the phrase simple spirit only gets one time, and it's in this moment as well. In other words, I'm looking at these northern lights, and I'm infected because I'm a poet that spends all my time sitting alone in my room writing poems that I never really share with too many folks, knowing full well that there's something majestic about these northern lights, but they don't realize it. And now I'm beginning to have a bit of a think, she says. Notice it infects my simple spirit with taints of majesty. I love the word taints as in, a painting term almost, right? Taints versus tents, right? Taints of majesty till I take vaster, that's the right word given the northern lights, vaster attitudes. And then this wonderful line, and strut upon my stem. Now, again, this is why I think daisies works better at the end of the poem. In other words, if a flower knew how amazingly majestic and beautiful it was, it would be like it was showing off, strutting upon its stem. It's a wonderful word choice. By the way, you'll remember strut from our study of poem 140. Disdaining men and oxygen. Obviously, our sounds here are great, right? And for arrogance of them. In other words, she begins to kind of think about herself and the ways that maybe she could be a bit arrogant if she wanted to think about how majestic the splendor of her stuff. And then she goes to splendor. My splendors. Notice the paragraph break, the stanza break. My splendors. Now, many have seen this as not her talking about how amazing she is, but rather her poetry. My splendors are menagerie. Now, that's a fascinating word, right? The idea of a display case, even sometimes to contain something, right? A place maybe even where animals are kept. My menagerie, or our menagerie shown off. But now this is an interesting word, competeless. By the way, this is not completeless. This is competeless show. And of course, she loves to do this, to turn verbs into adjectives, right? By adding some kind of suffix. She loves to play games with words, right? Their competeless show will entertain the centuries when I am long ago. Only Emily will come up with this phrase to talk about, when I'm dead and gone. When I am long ago. I mean, think about the way that's a great way to think about someday you won't be here, right? We've not met any 200-year-old people, as we've said. When I am long ago, think about what she's saying. My splendors, assuming it's her poetry, will entertain people centuries from now. And as we've commented already, Emily has a very dubious kind of sense of whether she will ever be remembered or not. She'll say in another text, "This is my letter to the world that never wrote to me, for love of her," speaking here now of nature, "sweet countrymen, judge tenderly of me," and here we're back to it again. I cannot help but think of Dante taking his little stroll in Limbo, where he walks up to all of those amazingly great poets, and they say, "Hey, is that the great poet Dante?" Of course, writing himself into the poem, and yet somehow congratulating himself that he will be remembered long after the fact. We commented in our study of Whitman the same game when we did all of the poems of Leaves of Grass. Speaking of grass, notice, now we'll finally get to it, an island, notice capitalized, in dishonored grass. We're going to get to grass, by the way, in the next poem, 291 as well. Whom none but beetles. No, by the way, when we get to poem 949, it will be under the beetles' cellar. It's a fun way to think about the fact that we've got to go under the ground. And again, we're thinking, of course, about Whitman in passage 6 of Song of Myself. What is the grass? A child asked. I think there's something significant about the fact that the last word of this poem is no. That is to say, maybe she is asking, do the Northern Lights know that they're stunningly beautiful? Is there any sense that an artist can know that her work is splendorous, to use her word, splendors? When we get to poem 451, we're going to play around with this idea again, and it's going to sound like this. We won't exegete this; we'll just read it to enjoy it. The outer from the inner derives its magnitude. 'Tis duke or dwarf according as is the central mood. The fine, unvarying axis that regulates the wheel, though spokes spin more conspicuous and fling a dust the while. The inner paints the outer, the brush without the hand. Its picture publishes precise as in the inner brand. On fine arterial canvas, a cheek, perchance a brow, the star's whole secret in the lake. Eyes were not meant to know. Again, both of these poems ending with that important epistemological concept of knowledge. What can we know? All right, well, what's going on in 2A here? I think our argument is that great artists long for the splendor of their work to be remembered when they are long ago. At 2B, I'm blown away by the words that she only uses one time in her poetry, preconcerted, unconcerned, infects. By the way, notice how all those words kind of work together as well. Many, 3A, many have read this poem as somehow related to Wallace Stevenson's The Auroras of Autumn, and I think that works very nicely. I think of Keats's when I have fears that I may cease to be, then on the shore of the wide world I stand alone and think, till love and fame to nothingness do sink. It, I think, works there. Finally, at 3B, as for you, how can we own a poem like this? What are your splendors that you hope can be remembered when you are long ago? I hope Emily's challenging you. Thank you.